So can I ask, I mean, we know the job is hard. We used to, I used to play games with myself and I didn't want to call it cold calling because I would psych myself out. Right. So we called it developmental calling. Right. We want to develop a relationship. I know I'm not in my business. I wasn't trying to sell anything on the phone. I was just trying to get to the next step. So going back to when this was a primary thing I did as a sales guy, I want to say the data I remember was if I was calling a list and we'd call out of phone books, we would use the Polk's guide out of the library. It would be a Chamber of Commerce list. But if we made about 200 or 220 calls, that might yield 3 or 4 appointments for me. Is that still accurate, or can you give me any idea of what data typically looks like of how many attempts it takes to get a conversation or a meeting going?
Yeah, two different things. So one is how many calls does it take? Think of them as navigated dials that you got to do
Right.
in order to get a live human being who's on your target list on the phone. So that answer tends to be around 25. How many does it take just to get a live human? Kind of depends on the list, but it might take about 8 to 10 to get a live human. To get a target, it's going to take you about 25 dials. So that's pretty normal, right? Now we're down to your skill, and we're down to whether they're cold calls or whether they're second, third, fourth calls. Because the big problem you actually face isn't getting people on the phone. Once you get them on the phone, if you got some skill, you have the problem that 11 out of 12 of them are not in market for your offering this quarter. That is, the replacement cycle for B2B products is about 12 quarters, about 3 years on average. If I just bought one, I'm not looking for another one of those for 3 years, whatever that happens to be, right? So for everybody who's out doing go-to-market, they actually have a hidden problem, which is mostly they're talking to people who might be perfectly qualified for their offering, just not this quarter.
Right.
I'll talk to you later. So taking care of that, now you're down to 9% that you even have a shot with. So if you're a 50% conversation and meeting closer with those who are in a consideration period, you're running about 4.5 to 5% conversation and meeting. So now your 1 in 20 becomes 1 in 400 dials. So in the world we live in today, if you'd been doing 200 manual dials a day, you're going to set about 1 meeting every 2 days with somebody that's worth meeting with who's in a consideration period. Now, if you're really good, you can set meetings with people who are in an education period. That is, you're just going to have a conversation with them. You're going to create some trust. Actually, you got to create the trust in the first 7 seconds of the first conversation, but you're going to nurture the trust over the rest of that relationship. And now you'll talk to them 4, 5, 6 times. We used to have a guy who's one of Dan's colleagues, named John Jackson, just retired at the age of, I don't know what, 81, 82, a few months ago. And John said, look, everybody says I'm a good sales guy. All I do is I just talk to everybody on my list once a quarter. When they're ready to buy, they buy from John Jackson. It's actually that simple, but the mechanics are so daunting now that who wants to spend 2 days to get a meeting? That's crazy. So we like to run about a rate of about 0.5 meetings per hour of active prospecting. So if you're at it seriously and you got it, say you're an account executive like Dan, Dan runs a little better than that because he's very skilled, right? So he's using his follow-up list, or he might be running 0.7, 0.8 meetings per hour. So in an hour and 15 hour and 20 minutes, he's going to get 2 meetings. 2 discovery meetings that are legit are quite valuable. They're worth, I don't know what they're worth to Dan, but in our world, they're worth about like $3,000, $4,000 each. So you're kind of making good money right then, but you got to go convert it into real money by having the discovery meetings. And
Did I hear you say 7 seconds to establish trust?
That's all you got.
What do you say, Dan? Let me pivot to you because you're a guy who's ran the playbook for years, where you were the calling and prospecting you were doing was for the connect and sell product. How do you get credibility and trust in that quick?
Here, Dan, I'll answer the phone. This is Chris. Dan doesn't get to hear
Chris,
that.
this is Dan McClain. Dan McClain with Trade Show Displays. Hey, I know I'm an interruption here. Could I have 27 seconds so I could tell you why I'm calling?
Sure, Dan. Go ahead.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, And so, well, is that a random? Did you just say 27, or is that the strategy?
It's not
It's
random.
it's fairly carefully crafted. There's an article you can
It's
read.
brilliant. Because if you got me, I'm telling you, you can't get. I'm the guy you can't get. If some guy said you have 27 seconds, I'm thinking to myself, who the fuck is this guy? And I'm going, but I'm willing to give him 27 seconds, but not a second more. So what? But you've just purchased basically 30 seconds of my time. So what
27.
What do you think? Well, I'm kind of a flexible guy. So what? So the question becomes, what do you do with that time?
Yeah. So the
So
trick to the whole thing is, first of all, the 7 seconds, we learned it accidentally from a guy that was working for us. And then we kind of got schooled on why from a guy who's in the business, Chris Voss, who's a hostage negotiator, wrote Never Split the Difference. Everybody knows him. And one
Khalil
night,
and we referenced Chris Voss half a dozen times on our show. So yeah, that's great.
yeah, so I was lucky enough to be at a dinner where he was at my table, because actually I flew to San Francisco because somebody told me that he'd be at my table. And I asked him afterwards, he's like 2 bourbons in, but he could have been 3. I wasn't counting. I said, Chris, how long do we have to get trust in a cold call? He goes, 7 seconds, just like that. And I didn't jump.
Wow.
And I said, really? Because our research says 8 seconds. And he said, your research is wrong. It's 7 seconds. And then I got lucky after I recovered and took another look at his cocktail glass. And I said, so what do we have to do in those 7 seconds? He said, oh, that's easy. All we have to do is show the other person we see the world through their eyes. We call it tactical empathy. And then we need to demonstrate to them that we are competent to solve a problem they have right now. And I said, well, isn't the problem they have right now me? And he said, bingo, that's why you can't fail in a cold call, as long as your goal is trust.
I guarantee you, Khalil, am I wrong? I guarantee you, the listeners of Experience Builders, I don't know anybody who's thought that tactically about their cold call strategy. Now what I hear almost all the time is, no, the purpose of the call is the purpose of the call. We're just trying to get the next appointment. But the psychology of what you're describing is, if you're that thorough, in preparation of strategy at every step, this would be a fascinating approach. So this isn't just a technology product. Do you coach people as well on a lot of what we're talking about now, or is that part of the Connected Cell playbook, or they just have to figure that out on their own?
No, we don't let anybody get away with trying it on their own. It's too dangerous. It's like, this thing's like a chainsaw. You can cut down trees, you can cut limbs off them, you can cut a birthday cake, but you better know what you're doing. And so we teach them how to handle it. We call it flight school. That's what my shirt has on it right now. Because a cold call is like getting an airplane off the ground. That's the 7-second opener. Then you got to take it somewhere. And where you're taking it is curiosity, not value. That's where everybody blows it also. Value is very dangerous in a cold call. Because if you go to value, you're going to get this. Thanks, Dan, we're all set. And the reason is, you just called somebody up and you insulted them by saying that you, the salesperson, know more about their problems and the solutions to them than they do. And nobody likes that shit. So It's like, what do? Well, you skirt value and you go to curiosity. And the phrase you can use is, if I had Dan, say, well, reverse roles. So now Dan's answered. And I'm going to be selling Connected Cell because I don't know what he sells. So I'll sell him a Connected Cell meeting. So thanks, Dan. Dan, I believe we've discovered a breakthrough that completely eliminates the waste and the frustration that keeps your most valuable resource, your top salesperson, from using the most powerful channel in business. And the reason I reached out to you is to get 15 minutes on your calendar to share this breakthrough with you. Do you happen to have your calendar available? That's what I'm going to say. Notice there wasn't much value in there. There was something that was economic waste. There was something that was emotional frustration. There was something that was strategic, where you're trying to go and what resources do you have? Well, your top resource being wasted. That's strategy issue right there. We hit the 3 points. We call that the 3-headed dragon. We cut off all 3 heads, but we don't say what we do.
Well, and your ask was for 15 minutes. So to a guy like me, the risk seems low.
Exactly.
if my time is my most valuable commodity. So
And
Yeah.
would it be best to do those 15 minutes right there on the phone
No.
or to actually schedule the meeting? Okay.
No, you got to schedule the meeting. It's got to be serious. And if somebody says, well, tell me, what do you really do? What they're really angling for is to tell you to go away.
right.
So you don't tell them. And what you say is, Chris, learned the hard way that an ambush call like this isn't a fair setting to talk about something that's important. I'm a morning person. How's your Thursday?